Welcome back, everybody. This is the Compulang podcast for October the 17th of 2020. Today, I'm joined yet again by my good friend Troy.
Because he's back. Back again. Tell your friends.
Nice. Glad to have you back with us again for a second week in a row. Thank you so much for joining us. And I guess let's just jump right into it. So, first up, kind of big story on the news. There was some rather interesting censorship that went on over on Twitter and Facebook, a rather divisive, politically relevant story came out of the New York Post and was quite swiftly shot down by both Twitter and Facebook, making it so that users who posted the link could get their accounts locked, or they could just not even be allowed to post it. So I don't know about you, but that's kind of makes me feel a little bit nervous about the state of big tech today. What do you think about that, Troy?
Well, it's interesting because I think if I was reading the article correctly, they blocked the account that originally posted the article, or they locked it, and then everybody else just couldn't repost it. So I don't believe it locked down that many accounts. I could be wrong, but it's, the tech companies are in an interesting position on what they allow and what they don't. And it's interesting that with hacked materials, as they call it, they allow some, like things that come from WikiLeaks, for example, but they don't allow others, like in this case. And it's always a question of where do you draw the line?
Yeah, I thought that was interesting. I wasn't familiar with Twitter's hacked materials policy before this story came out, I guess. Frankly, because I'm not an active distributor of hacked materials.
Well, at least on the surface.
Yeah, it does kind of seem like the policy is not quite as hard and fast as they're trying to make it out to be. Might be being applied a bit looser in some areas and a bit more strict in others. Like you said, WikiLeaks, that's a notable exception that I think lots of people have probably heard of before.
Yeah, and so
yeah,
it's because WikiLeaks kind of has a history to it and is, what would be the word for it? I'm going to use the word instantiated. Just in the fact that it's something people are familiar with and is almost commonplace now. Not commonplace, but more per the norm. And so that's probably why they allowed things from WikiLeaks instead of just any hacked material. But it's a very subjective thing. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, it is interesting because, WikiLeaks was a little bit more, I guess, established, you could say.
Yes, that's the word.
That's their shtick, right? They distribute hacked materials, kind of, or leaked materials, I guess, hence the name. I don't know, is it just because the New York Post didn't, brand themselves as that type of outlet? But still, like, the New York Post, it's not like nobody's heard of them before.
Oh, well, that's true. I'm talking about where the New York Post got the hacked materials. Was it they themselves that managed to get a hold of it, or did they get it from a source?
Yeah, I think so. Based on what I've read, it seems that someone at a computer repair shop got access to this laptop that was dropped off, and then the person never came back and picked it up. And some of the information on that is what was reported in the New York Post story. So I'm not entirely sure that necessarily counts as hacking exactly. I guess Twitter definitely has the right to define hacking however they wish in their terms of service, but I would think of hacked materials as less of I stumbled upon this while doing an authorized repair, and more of a like specifically like unauthorized access to a system where like the person didn't consent to give you access to the
Yeah.
system. I don't know. That's just interesting.
Yeah, and I mean, we're walking the line of privacy versus transparency, right? We as, citizens want transparency in things, and we want to know what's going on uh, in the room where it happens, as they say in Hamilton. Um,
Yeah,
but we also, want individual privacy, right? And
absolutely.
there's that line again, right? Of what falls under what.
Yeah, totally. I hear what you're saying. The line between privacy and transparency, like especially when we're talking about the government, that can get really difficult to discern which side is which. But anyways, that actually leads really smoothly to the next thing that we're going to talk about today. Because of this story, and we're in the United States, and the U.S. has a rather divisive, yet again, election coming up pretty soon. And it seems like both sides of the political aisle have been talking about this thing called Section 230. So I thought we'd take a little bit of a deeper dive into discussing what Section 230 is. There was a really good article published by Ars Technica. It's quite a read, but highly recommend it. It's not too dry. It's a pretty good read. That gives a pretty good overview of Section 230, I thought. So, as always, that'll be in the show notes below this episode. But yeah, what did you think of Section 230 and how it's being potentially attacked in the news today?
Yeah, it was a very good read, and I suppose for those who don't want to invest the time in reading the article, I highly recommend you do. But overall, if I had to say a gross simplification of Section 230 is it allows tech mediums, I guess I'll say, like Facebook and Twitter and YouTube and things like that, to
Mm-hmm.
not be held liable for the things that are posted on their platforms, right? So they can't be sued if somebody posts something that is not law abiding on their platform. And that
Mm-hmm.
immediately
Yeah.
sparks a bunch of red flags. And a lot of people is like, oh, why aren't they being held accountable for that? It's their platform. Why this and that? And this article does a fantastic job of going into exactly why that is historically and like why that has worked so far. Because originally it was either if you are a platform, you don't do any monitoring or filtering of the content that is put on your site, or if you try to do any, you're immediately liable for anything you don't catch. Right?
Yeah, that was a really interesting nuance that I thought was pretty
Yeah.
significant, is that like if you choose, or if you had chosen rather, to curate the content that users post on your site in any way, shape, or form, then you're now responsible for all of the user contributed content, right?
Exactly.
Like, and that's what Section 230 is trying to like prevent against, is make it so that you can still like I like say I'm just a single person website owner or something like that. I have my comment section, right? It's my best effort to make sure that it's not full of like spam or porn or like terrible racism or something like that. But I'm not perfect. But if I chose to curate that, and like Section 30 wasn't there, then I might be responsible for all of the comments. So it would be like, then it's just this pure dichotomy of, do I have like extremely harsh moderation, or do I not moderate at all? And this Section 230 kind of provides for like a middle ground where you can moderate your content and you don't have to be responsible for all the stuff that slips through the cracks.
Yeah, and so Section 230, while it seems like, it's giving platforms the chance to not be held liable for things is the original intention was to promote the filtering of content by them and the managing of content on their platforms, which is the thing that a lot of people don't consider or see. And the article claims that is one of the primary reasons why those platforms that originated in the United States really took off and became the major players worldwide, is because they had that freedom to do however amount of filtering, because overall like the filtering of content when it's well done is, at least I think, a desirable thing that most people want in a platform that they use. And so right, there's already the incentive for these platforms to do that. Section 230 just gave them the freedom to do that without facing repercussions for anything they don't catch. And so that's a desirable thing. And so these platforms were able to really expand and at a faster rate because they didn't have to worry about this. Right. And that's the kind of claim that the article is making. And, to me, legislation has always been so far behind technology because technology is such a quickly moving field, and politicians, they've got a lot on their plate, and they just don't have the capacity to think about technology and its ramifications because it is complex and it is nebulous. But this is one of the few pieces.
So much less bureaucracy in a startup, right?
Oh yeah. But this is one of the few pieces of legislation that was really forward thinking, in my opinion. Now, is it perfect? No, I don't think any piece of legislation is perfect. And that's another thing that the article dives into, is what have been some solutions that have been proposed to quote unquote fix Section 230.
Yeah, I think it was, they wanted to like change it so that, well, how do I say this? The political players in this situation have been promoting like ending these protections for those who are using them to promote political purposes, like, oh, we're curating this content but maybe in a specific political persuasion, right? And like removing some content, not removing other content, and so they're wanting to add an exception for anything for reasonable steps, right? They wanted it to be immunity would only be available to platforms that take reasonable steps. Here, I found it in the article, to prevent or address unlawful uses of its services. So that's the change that they're trying to, or one change that has been proposed. I think that could have some interesting ramifications, especially because, as it says in the very next sentence, it wouldn't spell out what reasonable means, which means it would have to be on a case-by-case basis, kind of meaning that instead of then it being up to the tech companies what they can and cannot moderate, it would then just go over to the judicial system and they would get to say whether or not.
Yeah. And it's interesting because another expert has the opinion on this proposed solution that it's, how does he say, functionally equivalent to repealing Section 230, which has been another proposed solution. And he says it would make Section 230 litigation far less predictable, and it would require expensive and lengthy factual inquiries into all evidence probative of the reasonableness of defendants' behavior, which is a whole lot of jargon, but I think what it boils down to is if Section 230 isn't there, yes, things are determined by the courts, right? In either way, right? If Section 230 gets repealed, then all you have is how the courts have ruled to determine how what tech companies should be doing and should not be doing.
Mm-hmm.
Or with this, revising it so that immunity is only available to platforms that do reasonable steps. Well, those reasonable steps, as it says, would be determined by the courts.
Yeah.
And
yeah. This just seems to be like a really interesting collision of like the freedoms that I, as a website manager, as a webmaster, have, right? And the rights of people who want to express themselves online.
Definitely, yeah. And so if either of these solutions go through, there's going to be a lot of growing pains while the courts end up making a bunch of rulings to establish kind of the baseline for reasonable steps. And it's going to put all these platforms at unease because they won't know from the get-go what those reasonable steps are, right? They don't want to be the one that gets the bad ruling that determines what a reasonable step is.
Yeah. That's going to be very interesting to see where this one goes. You know, the election is in, what, 2 weeks now?
Oh, gosh.
2 or 3 weeks
Something
now?
like that. Half a month?
Yeah. Wow, it's closing in, and it'll be interesting to see where, especially, like, these freedoms online go. Like, are they going to stay around, or are they going to disappear? That'll be an interesting one to keep watching.
Definitely.
All right. Next up, we have a story from Tech Radar. If you remember, just recently, Nvidia came out with their new 3000 series GPUs that are both, really fast and surprisingly economical for people who have been in the GPU market for a while. They're kind of known for the 3000 series was kind of like, people were surprised at how low the price ended up being. There's a really interesting story from Tech Radar about its capability for cracking passwords. And that could have some rather interesting ramifications.
Yeah, it talks specifically about password recovery software. Like it mentions the Passcovery suite, which a lot of those things. So, you have a file that is protected by a password, and then you forget the password. You remember maybe some parts like, oh, I think it started with like an A or an E, or, oh, I usually put the number like 7 at the end of it, right? And so what these password recovery tools will do is you put what you know about the password in, and then it will what's called brute force its way to finding your password. It will try every combination of valid inputs based on what you told it to try and unlock this file or part of your computer or whatever. And obviously, brute forcing is very inefficient, right? It's a very inefficient way to figure this out. And so these password recovery software or programs will utilize your graphics card, if you have one, to help with the processing, because graphics cards are really good at doing simple, repetitive things super fast, because they're designed to generate triangles, right? That's the fundamentals of graphics. They're designed to generate and manage triangles. Well, generating passwords is that same kind of basic repetitive process. And that's what makes GPUs so good at doing that. And this one in particular is extremely good at doing that. The important thing to keep in mind is this a security issue now, or does this impact, a hacker being able to get your password? Well, it depends, because these password recovery tools, right? Brute force is extremely inefficient, and most security measures are designed to withstand brute force, right? You would have to brute force until the end of the universe in order to maybe guess the password, right? But that is assuming that you have a completely random password, or at the very least a very strong password. So if your passwords, or the password that somebody with this GPU is trying to brute force, is a common password, a simple password, a password that they would be likely to guess, then they will be able to guess it a lot faster, right? Because hackers, when they're doing this type of hacking, they have dictionaries of the most commonly used passwords, which you might think that your password is clever, but it's probably not. It's probably pretty widely used. And so if you have a quote unquote common password, then this might be able to break it rather quickly.
And so in this article, we have some numbers provided where it says that using a graphics card in the new version of this Passcovery suite, they were able to generate 669 million passwords per second, which is nearly 200 times the number that they were able to with Passcovery Suite 3.80.
Yeah, so that's the benefit you get from using what they call GPU acceleration, or using your graphics card to help with that processing.
Yep. An important thing to note about this is that we're not saying that, oh, these new graphics cards are on the market, all of a sudden all your passwords are not good anymore. No, these brute forcing passwords, like this doesn't work the same way when you're talking about a web service like your Google account or your email or something like that. So brute forcing passwords over a network uses different techniques because usually there's something called rate limiting, which means that you can't send too many password validation attempts before you get blocked.
Exactly.
So this only applies to passwords like where you're trying to break local encryption, where you have access to the encrypted materials or to like something like that, and you're just able to try as many times as possible. That's where the GPU acceleration really comes in handy.
Yeah, and like I said, even then, brute force is so inefficient that as long as you don't have a common password, you should be fine, right? As long as you have a strong, either like pseudo random password or a complex passphrase, for example, right? Those will still be secure. It's when you have like something like password 1 or like your last name and date of birth as the password, right? Those are ones that would be easy to guess and would be included in the dictionary that they're running through.
Mm-hmm. Or that they could they could easily generate a password that looks very similar to that and then eventually arrive on that by just brute forcing so many different combinations. So I'm actually an advocate, like as far as password security goes, I think it's pretty clear that the easiest way rather to increase security in your passwords is to just make them longer. In general, that is almost always true. Like I try and always use passwords that are longer than 20 characters. And that actually, like you mentioned before, is like, that stops being a password and that's more of a passphrase. So, you don't necessarily have to think like, okay, I'm going to think of, oh, Yankee Doodle went to town, and then you just like type in the first letter or anything like that. No, just literally think of a phrase, a sentence, and use that whole thing as your password. And that's really a great way to greatly enhance the security of your logins.
Yeah, because the security is all about predictability, right? Because if each number, letter, alphanumeric character of your password is completely random, that is impossibly difficult to just guess or brute force, right? And adding length to a password helps with being unpredictable because there's more guessing that you have to do. Now, having per se 6 random words in order will be much more secure than having Yankee Doodle went to town, because Yankee Doodle went to town is more predictable than 6 random words. However, Yankee Doodle went to town is itself much more secure than password 1 or Yankee Doodle or what have you.
Yeah. In general, promoting length and, typing in a full sentence or just random words. First of all, words are easier to remember than individual characters. And second, length makes your password more secure. So
a little password lesson for you today.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure that today you shouldn't really be using any passwords that are less than 12 characters long. Even I would even be willing to say like even 14 characters long, you're cutting it kind of close. So
Making my computer security teacher proud.
Long passwords, let's go. All right. So that's about it for that story. Next up, as you probably saw advertised all over YouTube the past couple days, the Apple iPhone 12 and 12 Pro were released to a confused audience because they're no longer including a power adapter, which I don't know about you. That sounds like a rather bold move. Bold move from Apple again. You know, they pioneered killing the headphone jack, and then and now they're getting rid of the charger.
Yeah. For a company that makes a lot of money off their accessories, they're really trying to be minimalist with these phones.
Yeah, I guess they figure that's one more accessory that they can sell.
That's true.
Right? Sell separately, and yeah. So let's see innovations by Apple the past few years. We've had removal of the headphone jack. We've had the notch, which is a removal of screen space, I guess, or you could call it an addition, just only in the upper right and left hand corners, and then the removal of the power adapter. So Apple's really making some interesting moves here, but you know the iPhone 12 does seem to have improved just about everything about the iPhone in, you know, incremental ways.
As one would expect. Though I always find it interesting how, looking at their internet advertisement, they put so much emphasis on the camera improvements. And I get that a lot of people consider the camera on a phone when they buy it, but it's interesting just the trend to the quality of a phone is highly dependent on the quality of its cameras now.
Yeah,
which I think is interesting.
How many does the new iPhone have?
It
now?
has 3
the 12
still.
Pro has like 4.
Well, maybe. I thought it only had 3, but I could be wrong.
I think does the 12 Pro? I think the 12 Pro has
maybe
like
the 12
3 on the
Pro.
back, and then the selfie camera. Yeah. So, what's next? Are we gonna end up with multiple selfie cameras?
They'll just be selling.
Is that our next innovation?
They'll just be selling DSLR cameras, and
that'll be your new phone.
Yeah.
It's just your DSLR, right? Wonder when are we gonna get side cameras on the phone?
Ooh.
So just the entire phone is just one, you know, ginormous eyeball, basically.
Yeah, and then you can do those. You could be able to do 360-degree shots so much easier.
Oh, there you go. There. No.
No, Jacob, honestly, if VR becomes more of a thing, I would not be surprised if they started adding cameras to improve 360-degree capture. I really wouldn't. It's going to be a while because VR is not there yet.
Wouldn't that be more of an accessory, though? Like, why bother having that functionality on your phone? You know, might as well
Why
just,
bother having 3
you know,
cameras on your phone? It's all accessory.
Okay, am I gonna sound like like Linus Torvalds back in the 90s when he said, "Oh, no one needs more than 512 kilobytes of RAM"? When I say, do people really want cameras on the sides of their phone? I think people would be more inclined to buy the 360-degree camera separately.
Progress has been stranger, Jacob.
Okay.
Well, I don't
folks,
think it will happen. I would not be surprised.
Side cameras on the next iPhone.
Well,
Let's
maybe
see.
like
Or
iPhone
not the next, but
15.
in future iPhones. iPhone 15.
Yeah, that's my official prediction.
We're 3 generations away.
Side camera.
iPhone's on the
iPhone
side of the
15.
camera.
Don't have
All right. Well, we'll see how that turns out.
I'll make sure to guest host when the article for iPhone 15 comes out. And
okay, you know, well, I think you'd probably get some rather interesting deals if you were able to predict it so far out. You know.
Oh yeah.
All right.
Some call me the Oracle. Anyway.
Anyway, fun article from ZDNet. Google is now adding humming to their app, so
I
you
love
can
this.
hum into the Google search app and find the song. You know, no one's playing the song and you don't know any of the lyrics, you don't know what key it's in, you don't know who sang it, but you can hum, 15 seconds of the chorus. Well, Google's got your back.
Yeah. Well, now that I'm thinking about it, this just came to mind because, I mean, yeah, this is just like a super cool thing. Google always has some fun, zesty little tech pieces for us, and I will definitely use this for sure. But I wonder if it would work capturing actual music instead of just you humming. And if it does, is this going to phase out the long venerated Shazam app?
That is a good question. I know that Google does right now. Like they can Shazam songs right now. The Google app can. So the humming thing is the new
Okay,
part.
I did not know that. So Shazam lives
I'm
on.
just
I
wondering
guess.
though, like, yeah, humming though. That's so human. I'm like, because it's one thing to say like, okay, we're basically recording a really, really bad version of the song, basically Shazamming it, right? But it's still a recording of the actual song we're trying to find. But no, now if someone's humming it, now you have to correct for tempo. You have to correct for pitch. You can't actually probably use the sound like signature. Like you can't use any of like the timbre of the sound because it's humming. It's not just a
most definitely
poorly re-recorded recording, right? It's not the original track anymore. So you can't use any of the elements of the original track. Literally the only thing you can go off of, right, is maybe tempo. Right? You're going to have to fuzz that one a lot.
Yeah.
Maybe tempo. Maybe I guess I didn't see it in the article, but so you can hum into Google search. I wonder if you could also sing, in which case they could use like
I
voice
think you can
search.
also sing and whistle.
Right. Okay. So if you can use like speech to text to get lyrics, and then because you can't use just the pitch because not everyone has absolute pitch, so you can only use like the intervals between the notes that these people are humming. And who knows, what if they're tone deaf? That's a whole nother problem. So if this tech actually, if they pull this off well, that is really impressive to me.
Well, I mean, for starters, I don't think it's going to work very well for somebody who's tone deaf, because that's on the side of the user, right? If I sing the same note over and over again, it's not going to find Bohemian Rhapsody, right? Because why would it? However,
wait, have you heard the intro to Bohemian Rhapsody?
That's fair.
It is all one note.
Maybe it would.
Is this the real
that's
life?
True. I did not think about that. I should have used a different example. But anyway, but yeah, and so you're totally right. There's a lot more variability in that than having, a recording of the song and trying to figure out what song it is. And that's why this has to rely so heavily on artificial intelligence to classify these things, because you basically, when you don't have an empirical way of figuring out what something is, you usually turn to artificial intelligence.
Okay, so we're just gonna throw this in the black box of AI now.
Well, I mean, if it belongs in the black box of AI, if the boot fits, Jacob.
I don't know enough about AI to say, yeah. Okay.
Well, so I mean,
we'll leave it at that.
Yeah, because AI, basically, what it comes down to in its purest form is classification, right? You give me something and I tell you what it is, right? If you look at all the like visual captures where it's click the pictures that have the stop sign in it, right?
Yep.
That's you training an artificial intelligence to be able to classify a picture as having a stop sign or not having a stop sign, which is used in self-driving cars. So whenever you've done that, you've actually helped places like Tesla make their self-driving cars, which is a fun fact. And so this is exactly what this is doing, is it's getting this sample from you, and it's using its, I think it actually uses a neural net, and it tries to classify it based on certain parameters that we wouldn't be able to. It's all like data. It's not things like, oh, like this pitch, right? That influences the parameters, but the parameters are at a lot lower level than we can understand just looking at it, right? It would look just like a bit string to us. And so
yeah, that's, you know, a lot more about like computer intelligence than I do, so
well, I hope so. I did take a
leave that one
class
to
on
you.
it, so there's my education coming into work.
There you go. You actually use something that you learned.
Incredible.
Perfect. All right.
Shout out to you, machine learning. Hardest course of my life.
Next up, just a quick announcement. If you're familiar with Rust, you may have also, Rust, the programming language, you may have also heard of Nim, kind of operating at a little bit of a similar level. They just had a 1.40 release. They said it's the biggest release since their 1.0 release. Having some new interesting features. Just thought I'd call that out there because that's a project that's been really plugging away for a while now, and I, you know, like to give them some recognition for it.
Yeah, I don't actually know much about Nim. What would you, Jacob, use Nim for?
So actually, what I have read about Nim is that it's kind of like a Pythonic version or Python-esque version. It just looks like a scripting language, but it operates at like the lower C, C++, Rust level is kind of how that works. So you do still compile it, but it looks more like a scripting language, and it has a lot more flexibility like scripting languages do.
The perfect monstrosity is what you're saying.
Yeah, one of the reasons why I actually haven't gone on to pick up Nim is because I appreciate more strictness in my programming, which is why I've favored Rust and haven't gone on to learn Nim instead. But, you know, like Rust has some really interesting compile targets, like Rust as a native target, you can compile the WebAssembly. Nim has also gone in that direction, so you can compile it to C or C++ or JavaScript. So it is different in that respect, so you can like transpile it, but and it just looks like a scripting language. So for someone who likes writing that more Python-esque, less strict syntax rather, maybe take a look at Nim.
Very cool.
All right, and the last thing that we have today is an update from the company Dropbox, where they are going permanently into all employees working from home. And they're converting their office into more of like an optional office space where you can come and hang out if you want. But everyone at Dropbox from here on out will be remote.
Yeah, it's something that anybody in the tech field a year ago would be like, what? Work from home? I mean, I guess sure, but when would that ever happen? Right? We have all these like in-person interactions, you know, when would that ever happen? But due to the times, this has become it's been kind of like eye-opening for a lot of companies because they are seeing more productivity, which I'm not sure if that was predicted or not. I would not have predicted that.
No, I certainly didn't expect that. I'm not. I actually hadn't heard that before. That are we seeing more? I said it. I mean, for Dropbox, they're seeing more productivity at home, but is that like an across-the-board thing?
Yeah, like I know, for example, I work part-time at Siemens right now. I had an internship with them over the summer, and I'm working during the school year. But they have started instituting plans for people, you know, after quote-unquote this time in our lives, that people will continue to be able to work from home because they have seen increased productivity. These companies are doing this, you know, they're doing it for a reason, and it's because they see benefits from it, and you know, it's all about the bottom line, right, for tech companies. And so it's apparent from these moves that they think that this will increase that bottom line.
Yeah. I mean, if they don't have to pay for an office space, I guess.
Yeah. And I think the biggest kind of facet of this that captures my interest is we've kind of taken a look at this period as, oh, it has come and things are different now, right? The normal is different, but soon everything will go back to the way it was before, right? But things like this, right? The tech field is not going to look the same even when all this is quote unquote over, right? There's going to be a lot more people working from home 100% of the time, or working from wherever, right? Now you don't have to be in a city where your company has a headquarters, right? You can stay in whatever city you're at and work remotely, because number one, this time has forced companies to introduce the infrastructure to support working from home. Number two, companies are seeing a productivity benefit from having people work from home. And number three, companies are able to do these things with their workspaces and give their employees more flexibility through this. And so this is not just kind of a flash in the pan thing.
Mm-hmm. It does seem to be really forward thinking, like they were forced to have everyone work from home, and then they just it was eye opening. Oh, we can have everyone work from home and it still works. So that'll be interesting to see if other companies also go along with this trend and make it more of like a, from here on out, even beyond the pandemic, work from home. Go ahead. We're a tech company. we can allow that to happen.
Definitely.
All right. Well, that was all of the stories that we had for you today. I'd like to thank you so much for listening to this episode of the Compulang podcast. Again, thank you so much, Troy, for joining us today.
Always a pleasure.
I love talking to you so much. Honestly, you provide so much great insight to these stories, and you have so much expertise and knowledge to bring to the table. Just really happy to have you on again.
Oh, well, I don't know about expertise and knowledge, but I definitely have my opinions.
Well, they're appreciated nonetheless. But that's all we have for you today. Talk at you next week. Goodbye.